So we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Alex. I'm the Community Outreach Liaison here at Second Story, and we are very grateful to have you all here to learn a little bit more about substance use among local youth here in Fairfax County. This is an issue that continues to grow and affect our local youth no matter where they live in Fairfax County. We're seeing alarming increases not only in use throughout the community, but also in the ways that it affects the young people we work with. Again, I think it's important to reiterate that this is not only an issue that we're seeing at our programs. Again, this is an issue that is affecting teens and youth across the county, regardless of, tax bracket, neighborhood, school. This is something that is affecting everybody. So those of you who might not be as familiar with our programs, I would like to share a brief explanation of our programs and of Second Story. Again, it's just especially for those of you who might be unfamiliar with our organization and our impact. I think it'll help you maybe understand some of the stuff that we're discussing today a little bit more. So Second Story is made up of 4 programs divided into 2 categories: residential services and community-based services. So the first program being Second Story for Teens in Crisis. This is our most well-known and I guess visible program. It's on Gallows Road. It has the purple door. This is a short-term emergency shelter for teens 13 to 17. It's the only one of its kind in Northern Virginia. And again, it's a short-term program. So teens stay with us for 3 weeks, which really isn't a lot of time, but their time with us is very structured and very intentional. And then we have 2 long-term residential programs, Second Story for Homeless Youth and Second Story for Young Mothers. These 2 programs are for 18 to 24-year-olds. And again, they are longer stays, they're 18 months. The goal being self-sufficiency and helping these teens with the basics, so they're not having to worry about survival and where they're going to sleep the next day, so that they can focus on their dreams and their goals. And also helping them with parenting skills classes, training, life skills training, helping them applying for their GED, those kinds of things. And then we also have community-based services that are made up of resource centers in Colmar, Annandale, and Springfield. And these programs are not necessarily only for people who are experiencing homelessness, but families who are in need of resources and support. So these might be parents who are working very long hours, families who are immigrants. So not only are they struggling with a language barrier, but also navigating in a new system, a new country, maybe families who are paying for where they're sleeping by the hour. So we help them with everything from food distribution events, after-school programs, translation services, ESOL classes, and much more. Again, I say all of this because I think it'll also help you understand how our programs are helping to combat this issue and why Second Story is equipped to discuss this issue. Our staff at Second Story works directly with the youth here in Fairfax County, and sometimes they are the first adults to hear about the issues that are affecting them directly. So today you will be hearing from Genevieve Dunn, our Compliance and Risk Management Officer, and Kimberlyn Pena, our Senior Program Manager. We will also be sharing a very raw and emotional video of our youth council discussing what they're seeing in their schools and in their community. So now it is my pleasure to hand it off to Genevieve.
Thank you, Alex. Let me go ahead and share my screen for the presentation. My kid doesn't do drugs. How many times do we hear this at Second Story when we talk to parents about their children, only to speak to the youth and hear the words, well, actually. And this doesn't mean that the child is bad or stupid or doomed. Substance use, amongst other types of risky experimentation, is actually developmentally appropriate for teenagers, especially in relatively affluent areas such as this one, because when you think about it, kids from affluent households do have more disposable income to purchase substances with. But that doesn't mean it can't be prevented or mitigated. Today, we're going to arm you with some information about what substance abuse looks like in modern youth and what you can do with this information. 61.5% of teens abuse alcohol at least once by 12th grade. In addition, 46.6% abuse some sort of illicit substance by 12th grade. Now, when I say the word illicit substance, you probably think of something different depending on how old you are. When we look back in the 60s, drug culture revolved around psychedelic drugs like LSD. In the 70s and 80s, mainly thanks to disco culture and rock and roll culture, cocaine became most widely used. In the 90s, heroin became purer and cheaper and thus more popular. 90s rave culture also promoted meth so people could stay up and party longer, and club drugs like ecstasy, which were meant to enhance your party experience. Today, marijuana is almost as normalized as alcohol, same with nicotine. And then, of course, we also have the opioid epidemic, largely attributed to overprescriptions starting in the early 2000s. Now, before we continue, I want you to think to yourself what this is. And it might seem like an obvious question, right? It's a pen. But what about this? Is this also a pen? Is this a lipstick? Is this also a lipstick? And finally, what's this, right? A flash drive. Is this also a flash drive? What if I told you that half of these items are actually e-cigarettes, more commonly known as vapes? These are the vapes. Did you get them right? And by the way, the vape that looks like a pen actually writes. Electronic cigarettes are devices that produce an aerosol substance, typically containing nicotine, but they can also contain marijuana. They also typically contain flavoring, so the aerosol tastes good, like cotton candy, pina colada. One flavoring compound often used in vapes is called diacetyl, which has a buttery flavor, so it's often used actually to also flavor microwave popcorn. In high quantities, it causes lung damage that's often severe and irreversible, which obviously isn't a problem for most people because most people aren't around a lot of microwave popcorn. But what happens when the average number of puffs per day for vapors is 140? What happens when 15% of people who vape take over 300 puffs daily? To discuss some more statistics about e-cigarettes specifically in youth, when we look at the data, teen use of vapes has increased by 1,800% from 2011 to 2019. About 14% of high school students and 3% of middle schoolers report current ongoing e-cigarette use in 2022. However, 85% of high schoolers admitted to using a vape at least once, even just to try it. When we look at teens who vape, we want to know why, right? The root of a problem is oftentimes the best way to attack it. 61% said they were curious. And as I mentioned earlier, this kind of curiosity is normal for youth and doesn't much discriminate based on gender, race, economic class, and so on. Anyone can be curious. 42% like the taste, 37% use them to relieve anxiety, 37% said they vape with friends as a social activity, and 29% use them to get high. Teens overwhelmingly, over 70% of them get vapes from their friends, but about 7% buy them from a vape store and about 8% buy them off the internet. Only 8% of teens who vape identify themselves as addicted to nicotine, possibly because 66% of youth vapers are actually unaware some vapes even contain nicotine. However, when we look at the clinical symptoms of nicotine dependence, these actually can be found in teens who only vape as little as 1 to 3 times per month. Now, speaking of nicotine, cigarettes unfortunately are also back in fashion. While cigarette use has declined over the past few decades, and e-cigarettes are still overall the most popular way for youth to consume nicotine, with the revival of 90s fashion trends comes the revival of 90s tobacco products. And this is dangerous because nearly 9 out of 10 adult smokers report starting smoking prior to age 18. So preventing or stopping cigarette use in teens could help prevent a lifelong addiction. While not necessarily physically addictive, it is also increasingly important to watch out for something called edibles. These are edible cannabis products you can eat or drink, such as gummies, chocolates, mints, lollipops, baked goods, pretzels, so on. They can be intoxicating and make someone feel high by containing a cannabinoid called THC, or non-intoxicating containing CBD. But either way, they can be really hard to distinguish from regular food products, which can make it difficult to determine if a teen is consuming them. For example, how can anyone know which of these sour gummies are regular candy and which are actually edibles? Some important things to know about edibles: they actually take longer to kick in than inhaling cannabis, about 30 minutes to 2 hours versus seconds or minutes. This means inexperienced youth may consume rather additional edibles while they wait to feel the effects, thus increasing the overall quantity of their dose. And this is unfortunate because once the effects do kick in, they are often more intense than when cannabis is inhaled because the liver turns the cannabis into a stronger form. They also last longer than inhaled cannabis, sometimes for up to 12 hours. So as a result, edibles can easily lead to cannabis overintoxication, causing anxiety, nausea, vomiting, and even symptoms of psychosis like paranoia. Another substance to watch out for is prescription stimulants such as Adderall and Vyvanse, which are typically prescribed to treat ADHD. The effects enhance mental focus and energy, allowing users to study longer and more productively. As a result, we tend to see this trend used by a specific population of high achievers with strong pressure to do well at school and in life in general, which may or may not sound familiar for this area. Now, prescription stimulants are often perceived as safer or even safe by teens because, of course, they can be legitimately prescribed, but they are still stimulants, just like cocaine, and consequently, addiction is a serious risk of recreational abuse, especially thanks to the concept of tolerance, meaning you must take more and more of the same substance over time in order to achieve the same effects. Not to mention, there is currently a nationwide shortage of legitimate ADHD meds when you get them from a pharmacy. So users may be forced to purchase substitutes via social media, and all illegitimate drugs these days are at risk of containing fentanyl. In fact, 7 out of every 10 pills seized by the DEA contain at least 2 milligrams of fentanyl, which is considered a lethal dose. As a visual, this is what 2 milligrams of fentanyl looks like. This is all it takes. Per the DEA's recent campaign motto, one pill can kill. And to put this in perspective, in contrast, it takes about 100 milligrams of heroin or 250 milligrams of cocaine for those substances to be considered lethal doses. But there's no way to tell without testing which pills contain fentanyl or not. It cannot be identified by sight, taste, smell, or touch. Here's an example. Could you tell the difference if given these pills? And if not, how could we expect our teens to? Now, if you don't already know, fentanyl is a synthetic opioid about 50 times more powerful than heroin. It's the #1 cause of fatal drug overdoses in Virginia. And when we look at overdose deaths nationally, 11.2% of them were youth aged 15 to 24, which is an increase of 500% since 1999. How exactly does fentanyl kill? Generally, asphyxiation via respiratory depression. So essentially, it brings your breathing to a complete stop. One way this can be reversed is naloxone, which is also known by one of the more common brand names of Narcan. Naloxone attaches to opioid receptors and reverses/blocks the effects of opioids, which quickly restores normal breathing to someone who's overdosing. It exists as an injectable or more commonly as a nasal spray, as you can see here. And you can obtain it in a variety of ways. First of all, you can purchase it without a prescription from pharmacies. Sometimes the cost is even covered by your insurance if you have it. If you live in Fairfax County or the cities of Fairfax or Falls Church, you can get a free box upon completing one of their free trainings provided by the Community Services Board. Other communities in this area typically have similar programs if you contact your local CSB or your local health department. For example, DC residents can actually get it mailed to your house simply by filling out an online form. Another tool that can potentially prevent fatal overdoses are fentanyl test strips. These strips can tell you whether a substance contains fentanyl, although they cannot say how much or how strong it is. They're used by dissolving part or all of the drug in water and then tipping the test strip into the water for about 15 seconds. One line means fentanyl is present in the water, whereas 2 lines means it is most likely absent. Of course, no test is 100% accurate, but this is a practice known as drug checking, and it does significantly reduce the risk, right? We call this approach harm reduction, instead of harm elimination, for example. Where can you obtain fentanyl test strips? Similarly to naloxone, some CSBs and health departments will provide them for you. However, you can also purchase them yourself from some pharmacies and even online through companies such as Amazon. So what can we do to reduce the likelihood of youth substance abuse? In order to understand protective factors, first we must understand risk factors. Every person, regardless of age, has unique combinations of risk and protective factors, which form a complex interplay that affects the probability, whether greater or smaller, that a person will use or abuse substances. Individual risk factors that increase the likelihood for youth substance abuse include developmental factors. Some early childhood experiences have been associated in the data with increased risk of later developing a substance use disorder, such as prenatal exposure to substances, abuse and neglect, or poverty. Environmental factors, such as parental substance abuse, children look up to their parents, often copy their behavior, even when it may be unhealthy. We also see lack of monitoring and discipline at home, such as not locking up alcohol or other medications safely. Family rejection, such as due to sexual orientation or gender identity conflict. Lack of school connectedness, and low academic achievement. Social factors, such as the peer influence of having friends who use drugs. Genes. We hear a lot about this, and it is true that some people have a genetic predisposition to addiction, but that doesn't mean that they are guaranteed to develop one. Genetics is thought to account for just half of a person's risk for addiction. So if you have a family history, it's thought that you still need to be exposed to other risk factors for it to happen. And finally, mental health. Common comorbid or co-occurring mental health conditions include depression, bipolar, PTSD, ADHD, schizophrenia, and some personality disorders like borderline personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder. And one reason this might happen is people with mental illness could use substances to cope, but in the other direction, substance abuse could even lead to mental illness by changing the way the brain functions. So in contrast, here are some protective factors which reduce the likelihood of youth abusing substances. We have school connectedness, like good attendance, positive relationships with school staff, and participation in extracurriculars. Family support and engagement. We recommend setting aside time to spend with your child, right, or the teen in your life. Developing a good relationship with them, sharing that bond, knowing what's going on in their lives and how they're being affected by it will not only make it less likely that they would engage in risky behavior such as substance use, but if they do, they'll also feel comfortable enough being honest about it with you so you can actually help them. And then parental disapproval of substance use. Parents sometimes worry about coming off as too strict in a way that might backfire. Some parents even believe it's safer to allow their child to drink or use substances at home. But remember, it is the role of the parent to not be necessarily a friend and provide rules and structure for the family. So one way to mitigate becoming overly strict would be to not only manage consequences for quote unquote bad behavior, but also to provide positive reinforcement for good choices. We do that at Second Story and for Teens in Crisis with our reward system. You can also involve your children in the discipline process by having them brainstorm themselves acceptable limits and what consequences for violating the limits should look like. Additionally, just in general, we want you to be mindful of healthy adolescent development so you can set appropriate expectations. It is normal, as I said, for teens to test boundaries and take risks. This does not mean that a teen is a failure or that their parent is necessarily failing them. So specifically, what are some ways to have these conversations and improve these or strengthen these protective factors? First, we want to start as early as possible. This is not going to be or should not be one conversation. It should be a series of conversations as the youth grows up. So we don't want to wait until the child brings it up because you could be waiting until it's too late. You want to teach at their level. So at a younger age, like preschool, elementary school, you want to keep it very simple. Explain the difference between good and bad drugs and to only take medicine when it's prescribed or provided by a trusted adult. In middle school and beyond, though, you're going to want to provide more detailed information. So, especially this is when peer pressure becomes powerful. So, you want to get to know the child's friends as much as possible and practice how to resist peer pressure as a general life skill. Listen sounds simple, but we want to listen before anything else. Anytime a teen perceives that you are lecturing them, they will inevitably tune out. So if it's a conversation, an exchange of information, right, you can ask what they know about drugs. What's their general perception of them? Do they seem dangerous or cool, for example, or maybe both? But you also do want to educate, right? Teach about the physical and mental effects of various substances, because if it doesn't come from you, it will come from peers or online, neither of which are particularly reliable resources always. Unfortunately, you can't always rely on school programs either, as these can be overly fear-based and sometimes punitive in nature, focusing more on, the legal side effects or death. You want to connect with the youth, right? Ask what your child or the child in general wants to accomplish in the future and how substance abuse could risk the achievement of their goals, even indirectly. Other than death, substance abuse can lead to car crashes, physical injuries, medical crises, legal issues, STDs, unexpected pregnancy. The list really goes on. You do want to be honest when necessary and possible. The child may ask if you've ever done drugs. You definitely don't need to confess everything, but if you have engaged with substances, it could actually, when you think about it, be helpful to be at least partially honest because you have lived experience of what the attraction was and what you wish you'd done instead. You want to be direct. There's a myth that talking to your kids or kids about this issue will kind of put ideas in their head and make them want to experiment. But in contrast, when we look at it, knowledge is power and will actually reduce the risk of experimentation. And finally, be calm, right? Don't react emotionally like in anger, even if the child discloses something that upsets or surprises you, because obviously this can damage their trust to have these open and honest conversations with them. So at the end of the day, when we look over these risk and protective factors, many of them are tied directly to the work we do here at Second Story. Obviously our staff cannot go back in time in terms of deleting negative childhood experiences, but our services do things like improve family support and engagement, provide healthy peer environments and reduce the influence of peer pressure, and teach tools to improve mental health in youth and parents. Prevention is best, and we definitely have a role here in preventing substance abuse, not just as a program, but as a community. At the same time, Second Story is not a substance abuse treatment center, but what does treatment look like? Substance abuse disorders are both preventable and treatable with education, medication, behavioral intervention, and peer support. The purpose of treatment, as you can see here, is to reduce the major symptoms of the illness, improve physical health and functioning in areas like social, academic, occupational, and psychological functioning, teach individuals to monitor their own condition and manage threats of relapse. What does treatment look like? Well, the first step in really any problem ever is identifying that there's a problem in the first place, right? And ideally, this is done at the earliest point possible. Second Story staff can sometimes play this role if we notice a client struggling, but so can you as a community member, as long as you know what to look for. So here are some warning signs of youth substance abuse. We have changes in friends, such as dropping old friends and making new ones, or on the other side of the spectrum, isolating themselves. Frequently asking for money, becoming more secretive and withdrawn, such as locking their doors or being more possessive of their phone. Academic issues like lack of focus and slipping grades. Attendance issues, whether at school or work if they have a job. Losing interest in previously enjoyed activities, changes in eating and or sleeping habits, breaking rules like lying and stealing, increased interpersonal conflict from just yelling to actual physical aggression, physical changes like rapid weight loss or gain, nosebleeds, glazed or bloodshot eyes, tremors, etc., and mood changes such as depression, irritability, and anxiety. The second step is to complete a comprehensive assessment to determine the extent and severity of the disorder, and this does need to be completed by a specialist who would look at the criteria for a diagnosis. Then, once someone has been assessed, it is possible they would need to be stabilized before proceeding. An example of this would be medical detoxification or medical detox. This occurs for people who are physically dependent on a substance to the extent that withdrawing from it could actually be life-threatening. And we see this most frequently with severe alcohol abuse or opioids. Withdrawal, therefore, has to occur under the supervision of a medical professional team, sometimes in a hospital, sometimes in a dedicated substance abuse facility. And the next step is to actually receive the treatment to address the disorder and any co-occurring issues, right? And treatment is typically a three-pronged approach involving medication, behavioral interventions such as individual counseling, and peer support, often through the format of group counseling. And when we look at the research, most people will need at least 3 months of treatment, and longer treatment is associated with better outcomes if possible. Finally, continuing care. When we talk about recovery being an ongoing process, we must acknowledge that relapse can and does happen. 40 to 60% of people with substance use disorders relapse at least once, although the exact number depends on the substance they abuse. For example, opioids being more addictive, they thus have a higher relapse rate. Some relapses are more dangerous than others. Again, using opioids as an example, tolerance is built very quickly, but when someone becomes sober, their tolerance does decrease. So if someone relapses by taking a dose they were used to before their tolerance went down, their body isn't ready to process that amount of drugs, and it can easily be fatal. When we look at triggers for relapse for us to be aware of, they can be internal, external, or a combination of both. They may be objects like old prescription bottles, empty alcohol bottles around the house, belts. Situations, especially major life changes for youth, that might be moving house, their parents getting divorced, a new sibling, the loss of a loved one, or even something as simple as getting paid, right? Places, bars, parks, hotels, gas stations, or people engaging with friends that they used to do drugs with. And then internal triggers at the bottom can be thoughts, emotions, and memories, especially if the memories are difficult or traumatic. How can we support youth during the relapse process? Ideally, you have established an open, honest relationship with them where they don't feel any guilt or judgment coming to discuss with you that they have these thoughts of potentially relapsing. And at that point, we have a couple of options to get them back into treatment as well as discuss these therapeutic strategies. So we have self-soothing, which is regulating our emotions in a calm environment, taking a bath or a shower, listening to soothing music, going on a walk in nature, that kind of thing. Tip skills are something called a dialectical behavioral therapy skill, and this regards the concept of distress tolerance, right? The ability to tolerate being in a state of distress. So this includes temperature control, like taking a really hot shower or holding an ice cube, intense physical exercise, paced deep breathing, and muscle relaxation. We also have the stop skill, which is intended to stop someone, obviously, from engaging in impulsive behavior. So S is for stop, meaning don't do the activity just yet. Tell yourself you might be able to do it in a moment, but let's think about it first. T is take a step back, so remove yourself from whatever environment that's been triggering. O is for observe, take note of what's going on internally and externally in terms of thoughts, emotions, etc. And P for proceed mindfully. Make a rational, non-impulsive decision on how to behave. Pros and cons lists can also be helpful for behaving rationally, thinking about with the youth, having a conversation. What are the benefits and disadvantages of using? What would it cost them? Not just financially, but in terms of physical health, mental health, relationships, school, job, housing, and more. Radical acceptance is another therapy skill. This involves making a conscious effort to acknowledge how things are and to honor how difficult things may be, instead of ignoring, avoiding, or wishing desperately for the situation to be different. It doesn't mean that you approve of your situation or that you've given up on the youth. It simply means that you've accepted the reality and thought about how to proceed thoughtfully. Sometimes, however, youth might not have the time or emotional capacity to process all of that, And in that case, short-term distraction techniques can be helpful, like dancing, singing, coloring, visiting with their friends and family, watching TV and movies, basically anything that can take one's mind off of the trigger until that urge to relapse subsides. Now, at the end of the day, our population of youth and families at Second Story is always going to include clients who use and even abuse substances. And you, as community members, will also encounter youth who use, maybe from your own children to relatives, students, neighbors, mentees, etc. What can we do to address this as an organization and as a community at large? First, by increasing our knowledge on this topic, we can implement prevention strategies through things like education and personal discussions, one-on-one discussions. Utilize second story program services to reduce risk factors and promote the protective factors we discussed earlier. Identifying warning signs as early on as possible, then engaging with youth in an empathetic, informed, and respectful way, plus seeking appropriate treatment and ongoing care for youth who need that extra support. So I want to take this moment to thank you for your time today and for your support of Second Story, and to pass it back to Alex.
Thank you, Genevieve. That was absolutely amazing. I will now hand it off to Kimberlyn.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Pena, and I'm a Senior Program Manager of Community-Based Services here at Second Story. And part of my work is to help support youth and their families every day. Our Youth Council are brave student leaders in the Bailey's Crossroads area who come together weekly to share ideas, receive training in leadership and advocacy, and are role models amongst their peers to create a more inclusive and thriving community, especially in the Coolmore area. They are the youth from 7th to 12th grade who use their lived-in experiences in Coolmore to help voice and make the change they want to see in their neighborhoods. This includes sharing what staff see on site and what they see daily when leaving their homes. They share about the apparent gang and drug trafficking activity, the lack of proper street lighting that make their parents scared for their kids to even be outside when the sun is just setting, the rising cost of rent and nutrition food that takes a toll on their families financially, and how from a young age they feel the burden to have to provide for their families. Many are newcomers or first-generation students who are aware of the barriers they face, but they do not let them determine where they want to go. Our youth councils have participated in leadership conferences, are part of our Second Story board, and have sat in numerous focus groups held by different departments in Fairfax County to voice their ideas and opinions for their generation and to make the change for future generations. There is data that shows how there's a 17-year life expectancy gaps between different zip codes in Fairfax County. That's a whole generation. That by crossing over a street, you can greatly see the difference in the quality of life. There are these pockets of underserved communities where they must live in multifamily household, try to make ends meet. Youth are exposed to difficult and often adult-like situations that can lead to higher number of ACEs, or known as adverse childhood experiences. ACEs, such as abuse, neglect, community violence, and more, can lead to long-term effects in youth development, which can alter their brain chemistry. Yet with even so much going on, we know that having protective factors and helping increase positive experiences in their childhood can buffer those ACEs. Our Second Story community-based programs are in the ground in the exact neighborhoods that need some of the most help in our areas. Our programs are tucked in right in Old Salem Village of Falls Church, a beautiful community space that we use in the Church of St. Barnabas in Annandale, and in the Springfield Garden Apartments on Commerce Street. We have been guiding families to resources in our Coolmore and Springfield Family Resource Centers for many years now. We have been the helping hand during our weekly food distributions, a listening ear, a confidant for people in the community who feel they need to struggle alone. Through our after-school programs, we serve 4th through 6th graders in our 3 Safe Youth projects. We have our computer learning lab for adults and youth, and our safe places to go after school during the summer, especially for our Coolmore Teen Center youth that are in middle school and high school. They also know that they will have something to eat, opportunities to form positive friendships, and receive homework help and mentorships. Our youth are incredibly hopeful. They do not let what others tell them is their limit become their reality. In our programs, we empower them to dream big while helping their peers along the way. We hold weekly prevention workshops such as gang, drug, and mental health workshops. Make sure to have fun educational field trips such as going to DC museums, local parks, sports games, and bring in guest speakers to talk about their careers and expose them to more than what they see in their neighborhoods. Many of your students have these fun experiences or make their first real friends here in the country for the first time in our programs. We watch them grow from a timid third grader into high school graduates who are getting ready to pursue higher education, and for the majority will be the first time in their whole family to go to college. Many come back to our programs to give back because they know their stories are important and sharing those stories can lead to change. The opioid crisis is urgent. It is a public health crisis in CBSE every day when we go into work and what that youth are experiencing on their daily lives. It is visible when young adults who are under the influence who need help and want to change but don't have the accessible care that they need. It is in the stories we hear of mothers looking for detox centers for their children. It is when little brothers and sisters are looking for their older siblings because they haven't seen them in days because they are suffering under addiction. The crisis here in Fairfax counties, in our neighborhoods, and is affecting our youth at such a young age. Yet, it does not need to keep going this way. Through our partnerships, we have been able to do Narcan training to families in our programs with the Community Services Board. We have been able to host police town halls to talk about security issues with Fairfax County Police, and have been working closely with other departments to make treatment and medical care more accessible, such as working with the George Mason's MAP Clinic and Innova Cares clinics, just to name a few. Second Story is only one part of helping the crisis end. It requires a web of connections, resources, people from different fields and abilities to come together to share ideas and give opportunities to youth and their families. Because if we can help build the resilience from the start, make youth feel that they have a sense of leadership and belong in the communities, we can all achieve so much. Here's some information based on what we hear on the youth in the neighborhood and local police enforcement. Some of it is just slang. They see so much of this, such as a young age and as in elementary school, known as calling someone that is going through addiction as perkies because they're using Percocets. While it is a derogatory term, it is so common, again, that it is something that's being used loosely around youth, and again, as early as elementary school. More and more trafficking has been happening due to social media, such as Snapchat. Dealers would create fake accounts solely to sell and coordinate transactions. They could provide a menu of items and use it with emojis. Certain emojis would represent a certain product that they have available, and that's how buyers and sellers would know without using words or anything, solely based on emojis of what they can purchase. Certain areas are also known for selling opioids and fentanyl for a cheaper price, which makes the neighborhoods that we serve a hotspot for buying and selling. And it can be as little as $5 for a pill. An increase in young girls being manipulated into drug trafficking and increasing the rates of being victims of sexual violence. I know this is a lot of information, but we have hope because we see the youth are doing their part. They're rising above, they're reaching out a hand, and they're wanting to learn more. And you all being here let us know there is a community behind them. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kimberlyn.
you.
Wow. Okay. That was that was a lot of incredible information. I know that I personally learned a lot, and I hope you all did as well. I know hearing all of this information can be overwhelming. And, I know you all might be hopefully thinking, okay, what now? We heard all of this information. We heard about, things that are affecting youth here in Fairfax County. How do we get involved? Well, I have an answer. So I would highly recommend attending one of our open door information sessions. They're, exactly what they sound like. It's an information session where supporters can come and learn more about our programs and ways to get involved. Low stakes, no commitment. It's not a fundraising event. It's really just an information session. And we have virtual options, but this year we have actually now been hosting a few in-person sessions as well at our Teens in Crisis Center on Gallows Road, the one with the purple door. If you're interested, I highly recommend attending. I will be sending the registration link for that in the recap email. Another way to get involved is to just spread the word. We typically refer to, people who have attended certain sessions like these as our ambassadors. Essentially, these are just people, again, who are spreading the word out in the community about the work that we're doing. So it could just be, following up with a friend, a coworker, a family member about what you learned today. sharing some of those stats that stood out to you. We'll also be posting on our social media about today's session. So, you could repost on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. And also, I just highly recommend following us because we have some really great information about our teens and upcoming events and things like that. But again, I know you all heard a lot of information today, so I will not talk your ear off. But I do want to remind you all that I will be following up with an email with the recording of today's session, the link to the youth council video, as well as some other helpful information. But with that, thank you all again for being here. Thank you, Genevieve. Thank you, Kimberlyn. And I hope you all have a beautiful Tuesday. Thank you.